Hello, Andrea. Thank you for letting me interview you regarding Erickson's psychosocial stage of development. The purpose of this interview is for you to demonstrate your understanding of the theory and how the theory applies to you and students you currently teach and or plan to teach. Imagine if I have never heard of Erickson's theory of psychosocial development. Briefly explain salient features of Erickson's theory of psychosocial development. What is the source of this information?
Erik Erikson is a psychologist who developed these stages of development that discussed what we move through in an emotional, social, behavioral space between birth and death. In each of these stages, he discusses the fact that we have different conflicts, we ask different questions, and we have different priorities. Erikson was a student of Freud, but instead of focusing so much on psychosexual analysis, he focused more on psychobehavioral development. The stages that we have are the first one being infancy, which is trust versus mistrust, early childhood, which is autonomy versus shame and doubt, preschool, which is initiative versus guilt, school age, which is industry versus inferiority, adolescence, which is identity versus role confusion, young adulthood, intimacy versus isolation, middle adulthood, which is generativity versus stagnation, and maturity, which is ego integrity versus despair. I'd like to talk briefly about them before I get into the questions. So when you're looking at ages like 0 through 18 months, it's infancy. So we're looking at trust versus mistrust. So an example of that would be for a baby to develop a sense of trust. Can I depend on you to feed me when I cry, to pick me up when I cry, to change me for safety? Can I trust you to attend to my needs? And if that is not developed, then there will be a mistrust that is developed. In early childhood, we have autonomy versus shame and guilt. So autonomy has to do with, when children are developing terrible twos or they start to say no, they are trying to show that they have choice. And with that, depending on a parent's or caregiver's response, they will develop shame or guilt, or they will have a permissive attitude about something. For example, when a child is learning to potty train, if they're going to the bathroom themselves, and they've been told that that's naughty, they shouldn't do that, they will develop shame about that. Or if they're, banging on the TV after you tell them to stop doing it or pushing a button, they'll start to develop shame and guilt in these places. However, if you give them praise, they will have a more permissive an attitude about it and won't have guilt and shame. So those are some of the emotions or choices that are developed in that stage. Also in preschool, we have initiative versus guilt. So children at this stage are learning a little bit more about independence and they want to do things by themselves. And they're also learning that whether they should do something or not do something based on our response or a response on their environment, and they can develop guilt that way. For school age, we have industry versus inferiority. So much of the influences for this age comes from their peers, whether it's neighbors or it is classmates. And so as they're learning to conform, right, to follow procedures, to stand in line, to follow a bell, to follow instructions, they are learning how to do something that is what industry there. And with that, they are able to compare and contrast themselves. So if they are not doing well at these things, or for example, if students are doing their work or getting good grades on tests, but they're not, then they will feel a sense of inferiority about that. And if that is not rectified, they will be in recovery stages later on. And then we have adolescence, which is identity versus role confusion. So during the time of adolescence, the youth or adolescents are learning about who they are. And they're learning about who they are depending on their influences. They're also trying to begin to separate themselves from their parents' thoughts, and they're learning and are being influenced by the world and peers that are around them. If children in this stage are not giving enough independence to develop independence, then they will have role confusion. They will rebel. They will struggle with, having a separate sense of self from their caregivers and parents. The next stage is young adulthood. I believe it was from about 21 to 39 or 40. In this stage, it's intimacy versus isolation. In this stage, relationships are very important. Much of our time and our emotional energy and space is dedicated to developing or changing relationships, thinking about relationships, whether it's friendships or marriages or things that are beneficial in our life. We are also separating from relationships, maybe from high school, figuring out who our real peers are. So we're investing a lot of time. If we didn't find that successfully, we can find ourselves in a state of isolation, and we may have certain negative feelings associated with that. So sometimes we can struggle with being lonely or isolated if we haven't been very successful in developing positive relationships in our life. The next is middle adulthood, which is generativity versus stagnation. In this phase, many adults are established. They have their career, they have their family, they may have their marriages. They want to bring more meaning to their life. They want to see that their work and that their family life and what they are doing has a purpose and is making change, and that it can extend beyond them. They also can struggle with stagnation, being in a mundane state of thinking and being, if there is not something to help keep them inspired. Also, if they have, begin to, I don't want to say fail, but maybe not reach where they feel like they should have reached at this point, they can feel stagnated, or they can have negative feelings associated with this. In maturity, we have ego, integrity versus despair. In this stage, it is in our aging years, and as we age, we have time to reflect on our life decisions, on our relationships, on just the state of our life. And if we have positive memories, or if we have those around us who are positive, we can feel good about ourselves, and our ego can be intact, and we can have integrity about what we have done. If we don't have those positive reflections, we may go into despair, feeling like we didn't do the best with our time, or we can be, regretful or trying to replay would've, could've, should've in the past. So these are some of the stage, or these are all of the stages of Erik Erikson's stages of psychosocial development. So we'll start with our questions.
Thank you. At what stage of development do you see yourself now, and why do you think so?
At this time, I think I am in the young adult stage because of my age, but a little bit maybe into the next stage as well, which is generativity and stagnation, but still more towards the young adult. I feel like relationships are still very important. I'm developing that. I'm trying to see what relationships are important, ones that need to be changed or let go of, and just trying to develop that. But also I'm developing my career, and I'm raising a family, and I want to have meaning in my life. And sometimes I can feel stagnation too if, I am not moving in a way that, is helping me retain my identity as a person.
Okay. Explain how being at this stage of development may influence your behavior and outlook in your classroom.
I think the stages of development can affect me in my classroom because at this stage, I do develop relationships and hold relationships in high esteem. And being a good educator is about building relationships with your students. And so how I treat them, how I invite them to treat me, or create circumstances for them to treat each other is very important. So like us doing group work or talking about how to respect each other, how to hold conversations with each other, how to interact with each other is very important. Many of the kids in my class are from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, as we are inner city school in most district. And so they may have some dysfunction in this area at home, typically. And so when they come to class, they are not necessarily that adept at these relationships. So with me being in this stage, it helps me want to develop that. Also, I want to be responsible and accountable. So that's important to me. So I create the best opportunities for them to also be accountable and responsible.
Identify at what level your students are or are likely to be at in Erickson's stages?
My students are definitely in the adolescent phase. They are middle school students with hormones raging, and what's important to them is how their peers see them and whether they have peer approval. You know, I'll have certain kids or students in one class, and they'll behave a certain way, and when their friends come in, they can be a totally different student or have a total different side. I think that they are constantly struggling with their own identity, finding where they fit in, where they don't fit in, trying to be under the radar or, obtain a lot of peer attention.
Explain how being at this stage of development may influence their behavior and outlook in the classroom. On what do you base this explanation?
I think typically I have a lot of kids that want to challenge me, but at the same time, they also seek my approval and acceptance. And so it's kind of an interesting dynamic, and it takes a lot for me to stay centered so that I can, react to them in a non-egoistic way, that I can, put down whatever I'm feeling at that moment and do my best to be there for them and help them have a better learning experience. I think they are exploring their independence in that way. And I think that they're still young enough, though, that although they challenge me and may think they know everything sometimes, if I can build that relationship or I can engage them, that they are still wanting to explore what I have to say.
What might be some disconnects between you and your students, keeping the difference in the two stages in mind?
I think some of the disconnects have to do with how we think about ideas and how we process them. I think as an adult, I can have an idea and also think about the antecedent and the consequence. A lot of the students are not connecting the consequence with some of their actions and behaviors. I also feel like, in a classroom we set boundaries and expectations, and they are challenging that. And so many times they don't understand things like, how come I can't go to the bathroom anytime I want? Or how come I can't sharpen my pencil anytime I want? Or how come I can't yell across the room at my friend, because I want attention from them, and so it's like delaying their gratification for this attention that they're seeking from their peers, in the classroom. And so for me, it's like, I'm so out of that stage, it doesn't always make sense, but I have to remember that, they're in the stage, that's what they're doing, that's why they're doing it. And I think that helps me from, being upset. I'm like, okay, I remember you're in the stage, now let me help guide you back, to a more accountable or socially appropriate state.
Wonderful. And thank you for those very clear responses. Are there any final or further comments you'd like to add?
I'd like to add that I know in my reflection, I said I didn't want to do this assignment because I felt like I was just recalling, regurgitating information. But I changed my mind. I take it back because I think maybe if I would have written something on it, I might have felt like that. But this is my first time doing a video assignment. So I feel like it is nice to have to pull that from my mind after all and to be able to think differently about something that I kind of thought more negatively about. So I appreciate the opportunity for my views to be evolved and shifted. Thank you. Have a great day.